I spent my 75th birthday eating alone while my family used my money to chase sunshine I would never feel. It was meant to be a memorable celebration, something I hadn't experienced in years. A promise had been whispered to me like a prayer, a little happiness, some brightness, a chance to be cherished once more. I dressed carefully that morning, prepared a feast with trembling hands, and waited by the window as shadows grew long across my kitchen floor. But the events of that day shifted something fundamental in my understanding of everyone and everything that surrounded me. I may be growing old, but I am not blind. More importantly, I am not defenseless. Before I begin this story, this confession that has lived too long in the silence of my chest, let me thank you for listening. Your presence here, in this moment, means more than you might know. The promise of paradise, I had spent months nurturing that dream like a delicate seedling. Back in February, when winter still held the world in its gray embrace, my son Marcus called with news that made my heart flutter like a bird against glass. They were planning something special for my 75th birthday, he said. A real vacation. A celebration worthy of all the years I had given. A warm place, Mama, he said, his voice carrying that familiar charm that had gotten him out of trouble since he was 7. Just pack your prettiest dresses and let us handle everything else. That day, joy spilled through me so suddenly I nearly dropped my coffee cup. I hadn't been anywhere but the pharmacy and Sunday service for years, not since Harold's funeral left me tethered to grief and routine. The thought of sand between my toes, of salt air filling my lungs, felt like resurrection itself. When I asked about the cost, Marcus waved away my concerns with practiced ease. Didn't you work your whole life for moments like this? You deserve this, Mama. Let us take care of it. A week later, he needed my credit card to book the group tickets and lock in the rates. I hesitated for only a heartbeat before trusting the boy I had raised, the man I had shaped with my own hands. I gave him the card without asking too many questions, because love, I thought, meant trust. We'll leave sometime in late April or early May, he assured me. Right around your birthday, I promise. I believed him with the faith of a woman who had spent decades believing in the goodness of her children. The weight of waiting, I bought a new suitcase, purple, on sale, with the tag still attached like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. It sat by my front door for weeks, a faithful sentinel guarding my dreams. I packed and repacked it slowly, savoring each folded garment like a ritual of hope. The sundress with hibiscus blooms, my favorite, the one that made me feel young again. Church sandals that had barely touched pavement beyond the sanctuary steps. A sun hat I hadn't worn in 8 years, its brim still holding the shape of forgotten summers. And tucked deep in the corner, Harold's handkerchief, soft cotton worn thin by decades of gentle use. I thought he might join us in spirit, might feel the ocean breeze through fabric that still carried traces of his cologne. But as April melted into memory and May began to unfold, the promises grew thin as morning mist. When I asked about dates, Marcus offered vague reassurances. We're just working out the timing, Mama. It'll happen right around your birthday. I guarantee it. The night before my 75th birthday, my phone rang with the sound of rushing wind and distant traffic. Marcus's voice carried the weight of rehearsed disappointment. I hate to tell you this, Mama, but we're having to postpone the trip a bit. My heart dropped like a stone into still water. How long? Just a few more weeks, maybe. We've got some scheduling conflicts to work out. Oh, the word escaped like air from a punctured balloon. Well, at least I'll see you tomorrow for dinner. A pause stretched between us, filled with the sound of his car engine and my breaking heart. Of course, he said finally. I wouldn't miss it. We'll definitely stop by. That was enough, I told myself. Plans change. Life gets complicated. At least I would see them, hold them, feel their warmth fill the spaces that had grown too quiet since Harold's passing. The birthday that broke me on. The morning of my 75th birthday, I woke before dawn with purpose singing in my bones. I put on my gospel playlist and let Mahalia Jackson's voice fill the kitchen like incense. The coffee percolated with promise while I began the sacred ritual of cooking for the people I loved most. Fried chicken, golden and crisp, candied yams that gleamed like amber jewels, macaroni and cheese, rich as velvet, fresh string beans with smoked turkey, seasoned with memories of Sunday dinners when my table overflowed with laughter. I baked a sweet potato pie from scratch, using real vanilla this time, not the imitation stuff, because birthdays deserved authenticity. I brought out the good china from the top cabinet, the set with gold trim that only emerged for holidays and special occasions. Each plate was placed with ceremony, each fork aligned with the precision of hope. I set the table for 5, myself, Marcus, his wife Elena, their daughter Sophia, and maybe young David from next door if they decided to. Bring him along. I dressed in the blue floral dress Harold used to say made me look 10 years younger. I curled my hair with the same care I had taken on our wedding day, applied lipstick with steady hands, and lit the tall candles I usually saved for Easter dinner. By 5 o'clock, the house smelled like love itself, warm, welcoming, alive with possibility. By 6, I began checking the window. By 7, I had reheated everything twice. By 8, I stopped looking for headlights in the driveway. By 9, I was sitting alone at a table set for ghosts. The candles had melted halfway down, their wax pooling like tears on my grandmother's tablecloth. The food had grown cold, its warmth evaporating along with my hope. My lipstick was smudged from nervous touches, and I stared at the empty plates across from me, trying to convince myself that emergencies happen, that phones die, that cars break down at the worst possible moments. But deep in the hollow of my chest, I knew the truth. Nobody was coming. My hand trembled as I lifted the fork to take a bite of food that no longer tasted like celebration. I managed only a few mouthfuls before pushing the plate away and resting my elbows on the table that had witnessed decades of family meals, homework sessions, and whispered bedtime stories. I had bought myself a birthday card the week before, dollar store treasure that proclaimed, "You're still glowing," in pink glitter. It had seemed cheerful when I chose it, but now it felt like mockery, like a joke told to an empty room. The tears came quietly then, not the dramatic sobs of movies, but the gentle weeping of a heart that had finally understood its place in the world. I wiped my face with the edge of the tablecloth and sat in the silence, letting the hurt wash over me like a tide I could no longer hold back. No one called. No one texted. Not even a simple, "Happy birthday, Mama." At 10:30, I wrapped the untouched pie in foil and stored everything in the refrigerator. I blew out the candles, changed into my nightgown, and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the purple suitcase that still waited by the door, packed, hopeful, abandoned. I turned off the light and lay down slowly, feeling the ache in my knees, more sharply than usual. The ceiling fan turned in lazy circles above me, its soft whisper the only sound in a house that had grown too familiar with solitude. I folded my hands over my stomach and whispered to the darkness, "Maybe they forgot." Tried to believe it, but somewhere in the deepest part of my knowing I understood they hadn't forgotten. They simply hadn't come. The morning after truth. The morning after my 75th birthday arrived gray and hollow, like waking up in a house where all the furniture had been moved just slightly out of place. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at that purple suitcase with its untouched tag still dangling like a broken promise. Part of me still wanted to believe the trip was simply delayed, that Marcus had spoken truth when he said we would reschedule. Hope dies hard in a mother's heart, even when evidence points toward abandonment. I moved through my morning routine like a woman walking underwater, brushing my teeth, tying my scarf, shuffling to the kitchen in slippers that whispered against the linoleum. I made tea but couldn't drink it, opened the refrigerator to see yesterday's feast still waiting, closed it again without taking anything out. The dishes from my solitary birthday dinner remained stacked in the sink like accusations. I didn't have the energy to face them, to wash away the evidence of my foolish hope. Instead, I wrapped myself in Harold's old knit shawl, the one that still carried traces of cedar and lavender, and settled onto the couch to listen to the clock tick away another day of my diminishing life. It was nearly noon when 3 soft knocks interrupted my reverie. Through the curtain, I saw David, sweet boy from 2 doors down, raised right by his grandmother, always checking on the forgotten neighbors. He stood on my porch holding a plastic grocery bag and wearing the kind of smile that could warm a winter morning. "Hey, Miss Rose," he said when I opened the door. "Got you that lemon dish soap you mentioned." "Bless your heart, baby," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "Come on in." He set the bag on my counter and noticed my phone sitting on the table. "You still having trouble with your apps?" he asked, picking it up with the casual familiarity of youth. I nodded. "It keeps freezing up. You know how I am with technology. I press the wrong button and everything disappears." David chuckled and sat down at the table, swiping through settings with practiced ease. I returned to wiping the counter, giving my hands something to do while he worked his digital magic. Then I heard him pause, his movements suddenly still. "Miss Rose," he said gently, his voice carrying a weight that made my stomach clench. "Didn't you say your son was planning to take you on a trip for your birthday?" I turned toward him slowly, my heart already beginning to race. "Yes. He said it was going to be a family vacation, but the night before my birthday he called and said it was postponed." "Why?" David hesitated, glancing down at the phone in his hands. "I didn't mean to snoop, but I follow your granddaughter on Instagram. Sophia." I frowned. "Okay." He turned the phone around to show me the screen, and the world tilted on its axis. There, clear as daylight, was a beach. White sand stretching toward turquoise water, palm trees swaying in tropical breeze. And in the center of this paradise stood my family, Marcus, Elena, and Sophia, all wearing matching shirts that proclaimed Williams Family Vacation in bold letters. They were smiling, tanned, holding fruity drinks with little umbrellas, posing in front of a resort pool that sparkled like scattered diamonds. The caption read, "Much needed reset in the sun. Family. No drama. Just sunshine and happiness." It had been posted the night before. On my birthday. I stared at the photo, my mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. Slowly, with hands that had begun to shake, I reached out and took the phone from David's gentle grasp. I zoomed in on their faces, searching for some sign of regret, some shadow of guilt. I found only joy, pure, uncomplicated happiness that had nothing to do with me. I scrolled to the next post. Elena twirling in a sundress, champagne glass raised in celebration. Another showed Marcus laughing with a cigar in his hand, looking more relaxed than I had seen him in years. There was even a photo of Sophia showing off a new gold bracelet, her young face glowing with the satisfaction of being spoiled. I scrolled and scrolled, photo after photo of my family living their best life in paradise. But nowhere, not in a single image or caption, was there any mention of me. Not one acknowledgement of the woman whose money had paid for their escape, whose birthday they had chosen to celebrate by running away. David sat quietly beside me, his young face creased with concern. I could tell he didn't know what to say, didn't know how to comfort a grandmother whose children had not just forgotten her, but had actively excluded her from the very celebration she had funded. I swallowed the lump that had formed in my throat and set the phone down with careful precision. "They told me it was postponed," I whispered. "Said we'd reschedule. Said they'd come by for dinner." The tears came before I could stop them, hot and shameful and long overdue. My shoulders trembled as I pressed my hands flat against the table, trying to steady myself against the weight of this new understanding. They left me, I said, the words falling like stones into still water. They really left me. David got up and knelt beside my chair, his voice soft with the kind of compassion that comes from being raised by someone who understands suffering. I'm so sorry, Miss Rose. I thought you knew. If I had known... It's not your fault, baby, I said, wiping my cheeks with the back of my hand. It's mine for believing them. He didn't argue with me, didn't try to convince me that I wasn't to blame. He just sat with me in my hurt, and somehow that made it both better and worse. How someone who owed me nothing could offer comfort while the ones I had raised and clothed and fed had left me out like yesterday's newspaper. The full weight of betrayal. After David left, I sat in the gathering dusk of my living room, feeling something shift inside me like tectonic plates finding new positions. I needed to know the full extent of their deception, needed to understand exactly how deep this betrayal ran. I turned on my old computer, the one Harold had bought me years ago, insisting I needed to keep up with the times, and logged into my email account. I hadn't checked it in weeks. Marcus had always told me not to worry about such things, said he handled all the bills and bookings through it to save me the trouble. But I remembered one password, and sometimes one is enough. I typed reservation into the search bar, my fingers moving with the deliberate precision of someone who already knows what they're going to find, but needs to see it anyway. The first result made my heart stop beating for a full 3 seconds. An email from a luxury resort in Cancun, booking confirmation for a full week in an ocean view suite with spa add-ons, premium dining packages, and excursion credits. All paid in advance. Billing address: Rose Williams. Credit card: mine, the same one Marcus had asked to hold for emergencies last month. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking so violently I could barely control the mouse. They hadn't just forgotten me. They hadn't just changed their minds or encountered scheduling conflicts. They had planned this deception with the careful precision of a military operation, using my own money to fund my own exclusion. They had toasted drinks to new chapters while I sat alone with cold pie and melted candles, wondering what I had done wrong. I shut the laptop and pushed my chair back, standing on legs that felt suddenly unsteady. I walked to the hallway mirror, the same one Harold had hung when we first moved into this house 40 years ago, and looked at myself with new eyes. I didn't see a fragile old woman anymore. I didn't see someone to be pitied or managed or carefully handled. I saw a mother who had been taken for granted, a woman who had been silent too long, a human being who deserved better than to be treated like a convenient ATM with a pulse. For the first time in a long time, I felt something shift inside me. Not bitterness, not hatred, but clarity. Crystal clear, diamond-hard clarity about who I was and what I would no longer accept. The reckoning begins after I discovered the booking confirmation. Something in me went very still, not numb, but quiet in the way a storm goes quiet before it changes direction. I didn't call Marcus immediately. I didn't send angry texts or throw dishes across the room. That's not who I am, and it's not who I was going to become, even in my anger. I just stood in my hallway, looking at my reflection in Harold's old mirror, and felt my spirit settle into a new shape, one that had room for disappointment, but no space for being anyone's fool. The next afternoon, my phone rang with Elena's voice, sugar-sweet and casual, as if nothing had happened. "We're back in town and so sorry we missed your big day, Miss Rose," she said, her tone as light as meringue. "Marcus is going to come by and bring you something nice." I didn't respond with the gracious acceptance she expected. I simply said, "All right," and hung up. Sure enough, Marcus showed up that evening around 6 o'clock. He didn't knock, just walked in like he used to when he was a teenager, like my home was still his domain to enter at will. I was in the kitchen folding dish towels, and I didn't even look up when I heard his footsteps. "Hey, Mama," he said, his voice carrying that familiar charm that had gotten him out of trouble for 37 years. We brought you this. He placed a white paper bag on my table with the casual gesture of someone bestowing a great gift. Inside was a slice of red velvet cake from some fancy bakery, wrapped like it came from a wedding rather than a birthday. It looked expensive and impersonal, the kind of thing you buy when you need to check a box marked thoughtful gesture. I looked at the cake, then I looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. "That what you brought back from Mexico?" I asked. His smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered with a chuckle. "Oh, so you saw the photos?" "I saw everything," I said, my voice calm as still water. "The drinks, the hotel, the matching, shirts, the bracelet on Sophia's wrist, the steak dinners, all of it." "On my birthday." Marcus scratched his neck and shrugged, as if we were discussing the weather. "Mama, we didn't think you'd want to travel all that way. You get tired easy." "That's not what you told me. You told me it was postponed." "We changed the plans last minute," he said, his voice taking on that patient tone adults use with difficult children. "It wasn't that deep." I stepped around the counter slowly, feeling my heartbeat in my ears. "You used my credit card, Marcus. You paid for the whole thing in my name." His head jerked back like I'd slapped him. "What?" "It wasn't like that. You gave me the card for emergencies. I figured you'd be fine with it once you saw how much we enjoyed ourselves." "You figured," I repeated, tasting the words like something bitter. "You figured your mama, who cooked a full meal and set a table in her best dress on her 75th birthday, would be fine being lied to, left out, and paying for her own exclusion." Marcus looked annoyed now, defensive in the way people get when they're forced to confront their own cruelty. "Mama, it was just one birthday. You've had 74 of them." My hands trembled. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "One birthday," I said. "It was the first birthday I've had without your father, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, you wanted to spend it with me, not run from me." He groaned and dropped into a chair like he was exhausted by my unreasonable expectations. "You're being dramatic." I blinked, stunned by the casual dismissal. "Dramatic?" "Yes," he snapped. "It's not like we left you with nothing. You had food. You always say you don't need much. Why is this suddenly some big crisis?" I stepped back, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I thought about how I used to hold him when he had fevers, how I skipped meals so he could eat, how I pawned my wedding ring once to pay for his braces. I thought about how I prayed every night for his safety when he was out too late, how he used to fall asleep on my lap during thunderstorms and call me his favorite person in the world. And now here he was, telling me I had enough, telling me my pain was too much trouble, treating me like an inconvenience in my own life. I sat down across from him, staring into the eyes of the man I had raised, and spoke with a voice I barely recognized as my own. "I'm your mother, Marcus, not your wallet." He didn't say anything. He just looked away, jaw clenched, waiting for this uncomfortable moment to pass. I didn't cry this time, not in front of him. I just stood up slowly and walked to the pantry to get my broom. "You can go," I said softly. He looked up, surprised. "Mama, I need to sweep," I said, my voice steady as bedrock. "And I don't like sweeping around things that don't belong in my house." He stood slowly, and for a moment he looked like he wanted to say something. Maybe an apology, maybe an explanation, maybe just goodbye. But nothing came out. He left without another word, the screen door closing behind him with a soft whisper that sounded like the end of something. That night, I sat on my porch under the string lights Harold and I had hung up years ago. I rocked back and forth in my chair with a blanket around my shoulders, not crying but not smiling either. I just let the cool air touch my face and listened to the crickets sing their ancient songs of survival. I still loved my son. Love doesn't die just because it's been betrayed. But I couldn't unsee what I had seen, and I couldn't unfeel what I had felt. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a man who saw me as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be cherished. I thought that was the end of it, that maybe we'd talk again later and find some way to smooth over the jagged edges like families always do. But something was coming that would make me see everything even clearer, and this time I wouldn't look away. The final revelation: I didn't go looking for trouble. Trouble found me in the form of necessity. A few weeks after the confrontation, with Marcus, money was tighter than usual. The power bill had come in higher than expected, and my grocery money was running thin. I didn't panic. I'd weathered worse storms than this. I just figured I'd need to borrow a little until my next check arrived. David, bless his heart, had told me about a retired judge who volunteered at the community center. Nora Blake, a woman who helped older folks navigate legal issues and financial concerns. "She's sharp, Miss Rose," he said. "Doesn't play games. You'll like her." I didn't want to bother anyone, but I called anyway. She came over the next afternoon, a tall woman with silver-gray hair twisted into an elegant knot, sharp, eyes that missed nothing, and a no-nonsense voice that still carried warmth around the edges. She wore practical slacks and flat shoes, carrying a canvas tote filled with folders and the kind of competence that comes from years of seeing through people's excuses. "Miss Williams," she said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "You said you needed some assistance? Just a little guidance?" I replied, motioning for her to sit. "I might need to borrow a few dollars to tide me over. I'm not behind on anything, just a bad month." She gave me a careful look, the kind lawyers give when they sense there's more to a story. "Don't you have a retirement account? Any savings?" I nodded. I did. But my son's been helping me manage it. He's got access to everything, pays the bills, handles all the boring financial stuff so I don't have to worry." Nora leaned forward slightly. "How involved are you with that management?" I hesitated. "He's got the login information. He said he'd handle all the complicated stuff so I didn't have to stress about it." "Would you mind pulling up your online banking?" she asked gently. "Just so we can take a quick look, make sure everything's where it should be." I didn't want to embarrass myself, but something in her tone told me I should listen. So I opened my old laptop and let her sit beside me. It took a few tries, but I managed to get into the account. I noticed it before she even said a word. The balance didn't look right, not even close to right. Nora scrolled through the transaction history quietly, her face growing more serious with each page. I sat beside her, my heart pounding, watching her expression shift from concern to something that looked like controlled anger. When she finally turned to me, she didn't speak like a judge. She spoke like a woman who had seen too many stories, just like mine. "Miss Williams," she said gently, "your account's been drained over the past year. We're talking about multiple withdrawals, thousands of dollars, mostly transferred to a secondary account." I felt cold all over, like someone had opened all the windows in winter. "That must be Marcus's account. He's been handling things for me." She tapped her finger against a line on the screen. "Look at this. Jewelry store charges, resort fees, electronics purchases, even some payments labeled consulting services. But they're all routed through his personal account, not any business account. This isn't financial management, Miss Williams. This is systematic theft." My throat tightened. "He's just been under stress. He told me things were tight, that he was trying to build something for his family." Nora gave me a look, not cruel, not judgmental, but absolutely real. "Dolores," she said, using my first name for the first time, "you are not a bank, and you are not here to be bled dry while smiling through it." I blinked, my lips trembling. "But he's my son." "And you're his mother," she replied. "And you are worth more than how he's treating you. You raised him, you worked hard, you sacrificed. You don't owe him everything you've got just because you gave him life." I sat very still, my hands folded so tightly they ached. She closed the laptop gently, like she was handling something fragile. "You said you wanted help," she continued. "I can help you. But only if you're ready to stop letting your kindness be turned into a weapon against you." I didn't answer right away. I looked down at my kitchen tiles, the same ones I had scrubbed on my knees for decades, and thought about all the years I had spent saving every receipt, skipping hair appointments so Marcus could have football cleats, never once letting him see how scared I was when money ran thin. I thought about how I had waited on my birthday for a dinner that never came, how the people I had given everything to had used my own money to toast their freedom under palm trees while I sat alone with cold pie and dying candles. "I don't want to hurt him," I whispered. "You're not," she said firmly. "He's already hurting you." We didn't finish the conversation that day. I needed time to think, to process, to decide what kind of woman I was going to be for the rest of my life. Nora understood. She left me her card and said to call if anything else came up. It didn't take long. The very next week, Marcus showed up at my door again, wearing that familiar smile that had once melted my heart and now just made me tired. "Hey, Mama," he said, stepping inside like he owned the place. "Got some good news. I found a house. Real. Fixer-upper with potential. I'm trying to put in an offer before someone else snatches it up." I raised my eyebrows. "Oh?" He sat at my table like it was his own personal office. "I need $40,000 to secure the down payment. I figured maybe you could front me part of the inheritance now, before it's too late." That was it. That was the moment the last of my illusions died. The air left my lungs like a punch to the chest. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not my son, but a stranger wearing his face. He didn't even flinch as he asked me to pay for my own irrelevance, to fund my own funeral while I was still breathing. "I don't have that kind of money," I said, my voice flat as old soda. He leaned back in his chair, smug and certain. "Sure you do. You just don't want to help." "You've been helping yourself, Marcus," I said calmly. "I've seen the charges. The resort, the jewelry, the electronics. You've been draining my account." His expression changed like a mask slipping. "Excuse me?" "I saw the resort charges, the jewelry purchases, the electronics. You've been taking money from my account without asking." He stood up, his face flushing with anger. "You went through my stuff?" "No," I said, standing too. "I went through mine," he scoffed, pacing now like a caged animal. "So what? You're cutting me off now? After everything I've done for you?" "You mean using me?" I said, my voice steady as stone. "Lying to me? Leaving me home on my birthday while you drank and danced on my dime? You do this," he snapped, pointing at me like I was the problem. "And you're going to be all alone. Don't call me when you need something." I walked over to the counter, picked up Nora's business card and looked him dead in the eye. "I won't," I said. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the pictures on my wall rattled. I stood there for a moment, feeling the silence settle back into my house like an old friend returning home. Then I picked up the phone and called the woman who had helped me see the truth. "Nora," I said, "let's get started." The reckoning, it didn't take long for the ripples to reach him. Within a week of Nora helping me transfer my accounts, lock my credit cards, and revoke Marcus's access to everything, the calls started. First came a string of missed call notifications. Then the texts. Short, tense, increasingly desperate. "Mama, we need to talk. Why is my card getting declined? Call me now. This is serious." I didn't answer. I didn't need to anymore. Nora had warned me it would take a few days for all the legal paperwork to finalize. But the minute the accounts were frozen, Marcus would feel it like a slap in the face. And he did. I imagined him standing in some checkout line, trying to run my card and being told it was no longer valid. I imagined his eyes narrowing, his voice rising, the panic when he realized the bank login didn't work either. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilty about his discomfort. I felt free. But freedom, I learned, doesn't come without a price. Saturday morning around 10 o'clock, I was folding laundry when I heard the heavy thud of angry footsteps on my porch. Before I could even peek through the curtain, my front door flew open and Marcus walked in, loud and steaming like a kettle about to boil over. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. I stayed calm. I had practiced this moment in my head every night since I made the call to Nora. I looked him in the eye and said, "You'll need to be more specific." He scoffed, pacing my living room like he was marking territory. "My business account is frozen. My bank app's locked. The credit card I was using for utilities just got shut down at the gas station. You trying to humiliate me, Mama?" "I'm trying to protect what's mine," I said simply. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to that dangerous tone I remembered from his teenage years. "You really going to do this to your own son?" "No," I said softly. "You already did it to me." Elena walked in behind him then, but she wasn't dressed like usual. No heels, no carefully applied makeup, no designer handbag. Just a wrinkled hoodie and a face tight with worry. "I told you this was going to blow up," she muttered to him, loud enough for me to hear. Marcus turned on her. "Stay out of it." "No," I said, cutting through their tension. "Let her speak. I'd love to hear what y'all told yourselves while you were sipping drinks on my birthday, using my own money." Elena folded her arms and looked away, but I could see the shame creeping up her neck like a rash. Marcus didn't flinch. "We needed help, Mama. The business wasn't taking off like we hoped. You always said your money was for family." "My money was for emergencies," I said, stepping forward. "For groceries, medicine, maybe a grandchild's college fund. Not for vacations and designer handbags and dinners I never got invited to." "We were going to pay it back," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "When?" I asked. "When I'm gone?" "After the funeral. When the house is sold." Marcus's face flushed red. "Don't say that." "Why not?" I snapped, feeling heat rise in my chest for the first time. "You've already been spending like I was dead. The only difference is now you can't pretend I don't know about it." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Elena was crying. Now, quietly, mascara running down her cheeks in dark streams. Marcus finally spoke again, his voice low and bitter. "You've always made things harder than they need to be. And you've always made promises you never kept," I replied. "You promised to come on my birthday. You promised we'd travel together. You promised I'd never have to feel forgotten." I could see something shift in his eyes then. Not guilt, not sorrow, just the cold realization that I wasn't bending this time, wasn't going to smooth things over and pretend everything was fine. "So what now?" he asked. "You're going to cut us off for good?" I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I walked to the drawer near my dining room table, pulled out a legal document, and laid it on the table between us. "What's that?" he asked, though I think he already knew. "My new will," I said. "Drawn up last week. Every penny of mine is going to a women's shelter downtown, the one that helps older women get back on their feet after being used by the people they loved most." He blinked, stunned. "You're cutting me out of your will?" "You cut yourself out," I said. "The day you looked me in the eye and saw a resource instead of a mother." Elena was sobbing now, clutching her purse like a life preserver. "I didn't know. It went that deep," she whispered. "I thought you were okay with it." Marcus turned on her. She knew. I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence tells the truth better than words ever could. Elena left without another word, practically running to her car. Marcus stood there a moment longer, jaw clenched, trying to think of something that might win me back. But there was nothing left to say, nothing left to promise, nothing left to take. He finally turned and walked out, slamming the door so hard that Harold's picture on the shelf rattled. I went over and straightened it carefully, then sat down at my table and looked at the half-folded laundry. And then I laughed, not because any of it was funny, but because the sound of strength returning to your own bones can feel like joy after long silence. The year of becoming. A year passed quietly, softly, like spring blooming through the last stubborn patches of winter snow. I won't lie. Some days were hard, the kind of hard where you sit by the window and wonder if maybe you were too harsh, if maybe you should have picked up when they called again. But then I'd remember the ache in my chest when I saw that Cancun photo, the way Marcus looked me in the face and asked for an advance on my own death. The sting of sitting alone at my birthday table in a dress I had ironed just for them. So no, I didn't pick up. Not when Marcus called 4 weeks after the accounts were locked. Not when he sent a single text with no punctuation that read, "So it's like that." Yes, it was like that. Because when I finally took control of my money, my name, my future, it felt like pulling myself out of a well I didn't even know I was drowning in. Nora helped me get everything in order. We filed paperwork to transfer all my assets out of Marcus's reach, revoked every authorization he'd ever claimed, reported suspicious charges, some of which were even refunded. She also put me in touch with a financial advisor who spoke to me like a woman who understood the worth of every dollar she'd ever earned, rather than like I was slow or simple. We rewrote my will, too. All of my remaining funds, bonds, and property would go to a nonprofit that provides shelter and legal assistance to elderly women who have been silenced or exploited by their own families. Only Nora and David knew about the change. David, sweet boy, came to check on me every week after things fell apart. Sometimes he just changed the batteries in my TV remote or brought fresh bread from his grandmother's kitchen. Other times he simply sat and listened while I talked about Harold or my years sewing prom dresses for half the neighborhood. He never asked for anything, never acted like he was entitled to anything. So I didn't set the table for ghosts anymore. Dawn Tiu. My 76th birthday, I made a reservation at the community center for their small party room. I ordered real food, nothing fancy, just deviled eggs, fried chicken, red beans and rice, and lemon-glazed pound cake. I wore a beautiful gold dress that made me feel radiant again, and I invited the people who had actually shown up when I was at my lowest. David came first, carrying a Bluetooth speaker playing Mahalia Jackson and 24 daffodils. Nora arrived next in her crisp clothes and that wise smile. Then came the women from the foundation, all wearing their finest, some with canes, some with grandchildren in tow. We laughed, we danced a little, we shared stories and pound cake. And then Sophia appeared. Yes, Sophia. Quietly, without fanfare. She slipped in through the door holding a birthday card. She wasn't wearing anything new, no designer clothes, no new bracelet, no perfect hair. She looked nervous, uncertain, like a child who wasn't sure if she'd be welcome. "Grandma," she said, standing at the entrance. "I didn't know what they were really doing. Daddy said you didn't want to travel, that you were too tired." I believed. But then I saw the receipts and I knew the truth. "I'm so sorry." I looked at her, my only granddaughter, who used to be my little kitchen helper, standing on a stool and stirring grits with both hands. "It hurt, baby," I said, nodding slowly. "Yes, it did." She took a step forward. "Am I allowed to stay?" I considered for a long moment. Then I got a plate, handed it to her, and said, "Go get yourself a piece of that pound cake before Nora eats it all." She joined our circle with a tentative but grateful smile. I didn't hug her, not yet. She would need to earn that back. But it was a start. David offered to drive me home at the end of the night. As the sun set over the rooftops, I sat in the passenger seat with the daffodils in my lap. "Was today better than last year?" he asked, glancing over at me. "It wasn't better," I said, looking out the window at the familiar streets of my neighborhood. "It was mine. When we got to my house, I stood on the porch for a long time. The evening air was cool and soft, touching my skin like a blessing. I looked out at the street and thought about how far I had come, how much I had learned about the difference between being loved and being used. Then I went inside, put on my robe, and made myself a cup of tea. I didn't check my phone for messages from Marcus. I just sat by myself at my kitchen table and smiled, not because I was happy, but because I was whole. I loved them still. I'm telling myself that now, in the quiet of my own kitchen, with Harold's picture watching over me and the sound of my own breathing filling the space where their voices used to be. But love, I've learned, doesn't mean letting yourself disappear. It doesn't mean funding your own abandonment or setting tables for people who see you as furniture instead of family. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes it means walking away. Sometimes it means choosing yourself, even when, especially when, no one else will. I am 76 years old, and I am finally learning how to be my own favorite person again. It has taken me this long to understand that I am not a supporting character in someone else's story. I am the author of my own life, and I get to decide how it ends. The house is quiet now, but it's not empty. It's full of my own presence, my own choices, my own peace. And for the first time in years, that feels like enough, more than enough. It feels like everything.